Hi, it's Gary. Welcome to today's video. Since I was young, I've always loved Star Trek. I loved the way that Mr. Spock thought and the way that he interacted with the computer. Now, one of the key things that was important to the story was warp speed, and that let them travel between star systems very quickly and very efficiently. And although, yes, I know, it was only there to make the programme interesting, because without warp speed, it would take many lifetimes to cover interstellar distances, but it's still something it piqued my interest. Now, an example of the time it would take. Using our existing technology, it would take over 10,000 years to get to our nearest star, which is Proxima Centauri, and that's about 4 light years away. Even with other drives that are being researched, things like laser accelerated sails, nuclear drives, that sort of stuff, it would still take multiple human lifetimes to make that short 4 light year journey. So I thought, let's dig in and look at warp drive. Is it actually something that's possible? Is there some solid science behind it? Albert Einstein, in his special theory of relativity, he showed that it's not possible to travel faster than the speed of light. If an object with mass were to reach the speed of light, it would need to have infinite kinetic energy, and that's just not possible. Light, which is carried using a photon, that's able to travel at the speed of light because the photon has zero mass. To get around this limit, one of science fiction's solutions is the warp drive, and that bends space-time to allow the ship to travel faster than light. Although Star Trek that popularised the concept of warp drive, it was introduced in a novel called Islands of Space, written by John W. Campbell in 1957. And there are references to a space warp drive going all the way back to 1941. A small number of physicists, they have been looking at the feasibility of this warping of space-time. And yes, it's very much on the fringe of science, and there's a massive amount of issues with it. A lot of the current work is driven by a 1994 paper written by Miguel Alcubierre, known as the Alcubierre drive. He says that it is not possible to travel at the speed of light, but with some imagination, there are loopholes. Einstein's general and special theories of relativity, they introduced the concept of space-time. This is like a large sheet that's spread out and it's mostly flat. But if you put a weight on the sheet, or more accurately, you put a mass on the sheet, then the sheet would bend underneath that mass and it creates a well around the mass with that mass in the middle of it. This is similar for space-time. It's mostly flat, but it will dip due to mass, and that creates bends in space-time. Alcubierre, he's theorised that if you can create fields that contract space-time in front of a ship, and then expand it at the back of the ship that returns it to its original shape, then it would be possible to travel to a destination faster than light. The crew on the ship, well, they're enclosed in this bubble of bent space-time, so they experience the normal passage of time. There are a number of problems with this theorised solution. To deform space-time, it would require the ship to have a massive mass. And you'd also need to have 2 types of mass. At the front of the ship, you'd have ordinary mass, and you'd have a large amount of it. This is needed to bend the space-time at the front of the ship. At the rear, you'd need to have some form of negative gravity to close the bubble and return space-time back to its unexpanded state. And this negative gravity, it's a big problem. It's not something we currently have. And it's also likely something that might be never found. To have negative gravity would require us to have negative energy. And Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, states that energy must be positive. It is possible to generate some negative energy using quantum theory, and this is called the Casimir effect. But the quantities produced, they are so small that it isn't really a solution. During the coronavirus lockdowns, a physicist called Eric Lentz, he theorised a way to generate a warp field but using only positive energy. And they came from the work that he was doing with the field equations from the general theory of relativity. These equations, they're used to calculate the distribution of matter and energy that defines space-time. He was able to show that it's possible to use only positive energy by changing the way that the warp bubble is formed. Alcubierre's bubble, it's very similar to what we see with soap bubbles. It's one single curving bubble. The lens solution, it's different. Its bubble is made up of a series of connected diamond-shaped areas of space-time that they all work together. So for this, think about how a flock of birds, they're able to fly in one connected group. And that's how these diamond-shaped cells, they'd be very similar to that. The technology for this, it would be extremely complex, and it would need a large number of rings and disks made up of an extremely dense fluid of charged plasma. This charged plasma, it would be similar in density to that inside of a neutron star, which is the densest object we know about. There are other researchers looking at how you could create that warp bubble differently. One possible solution, instead of having a hard boundary like we see with the soap bubble where it's one continuous hard boundary, they're looking to see if it would be possible to have a field that increases as it gets closer to the ship, therefore it decreases as it moves away from the ship. This is a bit similar to how gravity works. It's a gradual field that changes its strength as the distance between the masses they change. All of these solutions very theoretical, very, very difficult to actually do something in practice. But they ignore one fact. All the solutions, all they do is talk about creating the warp bubble. But then how do you accelerate and decelerate the ship that's inside that warp bubble? That'd be interesting. I was quite surprised by the amount of research going on into this idea of a warp drive. But if we take the Star Trek timeline as canon, then the first warp flight by humanity, it's currently scheduled to be on the 5th of April 2063. So we've only got 40 years to wait. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. This was a fun topic. I like these ones, where we're looking at something from entertainment, but how there is actual real science and real research going on behind it. What are some things from science fiction, from TV, from books that you think might be interesting to look at? Please drop a comment down below. Let's kickstart the conversation. Please hit the thumbs up button. Every time you like, every time you comment, just helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so that you can get new videos as I release them. I'll talk to you again soon.